Hi there, Mike MacArthur from the Oshkosh Public Library here with more Librarian Learns. This is the series where I take a look at a bit of Oshkosh history that I found interesting or that someone asked me about while at the library. This year, 2025, actually back in April, marked the 150th anniversary of the deadliest and most destructive fire in Oshkosh's history that burned a huge swath of land and took countless lives in April of 1875. Fire in kind of the 19th century cities was just a fact of life. Fire departments were kind of just loose groups of volunteers, almost more like social clubs than a professionalized firefighting department like we think today. Fires in the 19th century could be absolutely devastating, and several, still loom large in history, including the Great New York Fire in 1835, the Peshtigo Fire in 1871, and the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. Oshkosh itself experienced a number of large blazes. May of 1859, 6 blocks of the business district burned, so 175 buildings burned to the ground. May of 1866, another portion of the business district burned to the ground again. 1874 was rough, 2 major fires that year. May of 1874, a spark from the mill of Spalding and Peck, remember that name, you're going to hear it again, ignited some manure and burned another 30 buildings in the area along the river. And in July of 1874, a blaze that started around Wood Street and the 400 block of North Main blew north, absolutely decimating a huge chunk of residential area, leaving 250, 300 homes burned to the ground and hundreds of people homeless. But each time, Oshkosh rebuilt. The common themes in all of these fires were hot, dry, and windy weather, and burning in areas of densely packed buildings all made of wood. After the first couple of fires, the city did pass ordinances that mills were no longer allowed to operate under such conditions, but ordinances are only as good as the people who actually follow them. So the morning of April 28, 1875, it was, quote, a terrible time for a fire. You had dry, windy weather, you had a strong wind blowing in from the west, blowing east, and though there were ordinances in place by this time to prevent mills from running during these kind of weather conditions, one mill was running. It would be right across the street roughly where we are today, and it was the mill of Spalding and Peck. Now there was some controversy after the fire of whether they were told or instructed by City Hall or their neighbors across the street, the Morgan Brothers Mill, that there were sparks coming out of their furnace. But what is known now is that it was definitely started from their mill when it was spouting sparks out of here and ignited some lumber that was across the street as part of the Morgan Brothers mill. Just before 1 p.m., the fire ignited and very quickly became an inferno, blowing very quickly down Marion Road, headed towards Main Street. So Oshkosh had 3 volunteer fire trucks or steamers available at the time to fight the blaze. One of them, the W.H. Doe, was posted right in the corner here, which at the time was the corner of High and Light Division today. So it was placed here because in 1875, they didn't have running water. So the city and firefighters depended on strategically placed reservoirs for the steamers to access, one of which was right here. Unfortunately, the fire department could never quite get in front of the flames. The wind was blowing embers and dropping them on buildings behind the steamers and the firefighters, and the W.H. Doe at this corner quickly became surrounded by flames and was forced to be abandoned as the flames overtook the fire engine and burned any piece of combustible material on it. Luckily, it was made out of metal, so they were able to salvage the W.H. Doe after the flames had passed. However, with its burning, Oshkosh was only left with 2 steamers to fight the blaze. At this point, you can tell that the fire line had widened greatly to several blocks all the way down to the river. And it became increasingly apparent that the businesses on Main Street were in grave danger. As it became apparent that the flames were going to overtake Main Street, business owners and residents hastily and in a panic started removing items from their homes and businesses and flooding out into the streets. But unfortunately, the flames were moving so fast and spreading so far that there was really nowhere to go that was safe. A quote from the German-language newspaper The Telegraph described the scene. The scenes of the shocked crowd, the wild rampaging horses led out of their burning stalls, the roar of the storm, the hissing of the flames, the thunder of collapsing buildings, the shrilling of the fire bells and the steam engines. It was a scene of utmost despair. By the time the fire reached Main Street, it was burning from Washington Avenue all the way down to North Seepy. Even before Main Street began to burn, the homes and businesses to the east of Main Street were on fire, ignited by the embers of the flames that were carried by the wind and dropped into these densely packed residential neighborhoods. Charles Bowrun of the Northwestern sat from a vantage point atop one of the buildings that had been rebuilt the previous year and noted that the whole area of the burnt district was burning at the same time, and the housetops seemed but the playground of 1,000 dancing demons. The scene was wild, awful, and grand. Chaos ruled monarch of the hour, and man was dumb with awe. Don't you love how they write in newspapers in the 1870s and 80s? So if there was a bright spot on that horrible day, it would probably be the saving of the county courthouse. So as the flames continued to burn unabated east from Main Street, people thought that the courthouse, which would have stood right behind me, was a complete loss. So the courthouse was originally constructed in 1860 and had just undergone some major renovations and additions in 1872, courtesy of architect William Waters. So they really weren't keen on losing it, but it looked impossible to save, so they were already pulling out records out of there, assuming that everything would be decimated. However, Sheriff Ebenezer Stevens was determined to save the courthouse. So he created a line of people hauling buckets of water up to the roof of the courthouse to extinguish small flames and embers that would fall on the courthouse. So they did this for hours. So sure was the sheriff that they could save the building that they refused to release any of the inmates who were locked up in the jail below the courthouse. In the end, they did save it. In old photos of the aftermath of the fire, you can see it is pretty much the only structure in the path of the fire left standing. So the courthouse was saved, but the fire continued unabated east and burned everything between where we are, Seepy and Washington. Finally, the winds began abating and stopping, and they were able to control the flames just about a quarter mile down the road, just past Bowen. With the fire finally extinguished, Oshkosh took stock of the damage. All told, 37 blocks had burned from its starting point on Marion Road and Washington Avenue all the way up to just across Bowen. The fire burned a stretch a mile long and over half a mile wide. Burned that day were homes like the Beckwith House, the City Library, 5 churches, 2 schools, a police station, several of the local newspaper buildings, and a countless number of homes. This fire was thought of as also the most tragic in that it was the first one where you had a significantly large loss of life. Dozens of people died either from smoke inhalation, burns, or they were crushed by falling buildings. Even to this day, the exact number of dead are kind of unknown. And the ones who did survive, the fire left thousands of people homeless, living in a quickly erected shanty towns amid the destruction. Though the scale and size of the loss were absolutely devastating, Oshkosh had been here before. And Oshkosh was ready to build back better and bigger than before. As the Northwestern said in the aftermath of the fire, if Oshkosh was doomed to be destroyed, then it was also doomed to be rebuilt. The city set up a large relief program that ended up netting over $23,000 in donations from everywhere, including New York and the New Mexico territories, all around Wisconsin, from cities in Wisconsin and businesses throughout the Midwest. As Oshkosh rebuilt, the city extended the fire zones. These were the places where building was restricted to only brick and stone construction. And for the first time, these ordinances and zoning ordinances were strictly enforced. Though most everyone applauded these changes, if you were a business owner at the time, there was definitely some griping about the increased costs and the kind of very zealous enforcement of these new building restrictions. So Oshkosh started to rebuild almost immediately. Architect William Waters was commissioned to rebuild a lot of the businesses on Main Street, kind of from Algoma Street south, which what burned. Everything Algoma Street North burned the year before in 1874. And so some of though there's been a lot of construction over the years, some of the buildings from that original 1875 rebuild still exist today, including some of the buildings you see behind me here on Main Street. Also part of that original rebuild were the buildings at 17 Wagoo Street, where Atomic Cats is today, and on Court Street, the building that was built originally as the German-English Academy. The 1875 fire also signaled the end of the volunteer fire brigade. It became real clear that Oshkosh needed a professionalized fire department that was paid and employed by the city and answered to them. This was a long time coming, and that the city was butted heads with the volunteer fire brigades over some politics and money issues. Though there was pushback, most people saw this as a logical decision. The paid fire department had their first call on October 11th in 1877. So what I take away most from learning about the 1875 fire is the resiliency of the city and its people. In the wake of the tragedy, Oshkosh built back bigger, better, and emerged from this fire, entering one of its most prosperous eras, experiencing continued population growth and a diversifying economy. Of course, lumber still ruled, and Oshkosh remained the sawdust city despite the fires. So hey, I learned something. Still like these videos? Want to see me talking more about horrible fires that happen in the city? Leave comments, let me know what you think. Come and see me at the library. And with that, I will see you later.